There are exactly two kinds of fear in this world, and most people who have lived comfortable, ordinary, well-lit lives only ever encounter the first kind. The first kind of fear is clean. It arrives fast, spikes hard, and dissolves the moment the threat is gone. The roller coaster stops. The horror movie ends. The car that cut you off disappears into traffic. Your heart rate drops, your hands stop shaking, your brain reasserts control, and within minutes, sometimes seconds, you are fully, completely, safely yourself again. That fear has an off switch. You use it without even thinking about it. And you assume, without ever really examining the assumption, that all fear works this way, that it is temporary, that it is bounded, that it belongs to a moment and not to you permanently. But there is a second kind of fear, rarer, quieter, infinitely more dangerous. It is the kind that does not dissolve when the moment passes, because the moment does not pass. It installs itself. It rewires something fundamental in the architecture of how you understand the world you live in and the space you occupy inside it. It comes from discovering once that something you believed with total certainty, something bedrock, something you built everything else on top of, was wrong. It comes from standing in your own home, your locked, familiar, supposedly safe home, and realizing that the safety was an illusion and always had been. It comes from receiving a message that should not exist, from a number that cannot send one, containing information that no living person could possess. It comes from looking at a security camera feed at 3:47 in the morning and seeing, in the corner of your child's bedroom, a shape that was not there in the frame before and is not there in the frame after, but is absolutely, unambiguously, undeniably there in between. That is the second kind of fear, and every single person in tonight's 10 stories has felt it. Not briefly, not safely, permanently. My name doesn't matter. What matters is this. Tonight, in the company of 10 real people whose ordinary lives cracked open and revealed something they were never supposed to see. Some of them are still processing what happened to them. Some of them have found a way to live with it. Some of them honestly have not. But all of them, every single one, agreed that what they experienced needed to be told, because silence, they said, felt like letting it win. So we are here. All 10 stories, no commercials, no interruptions. It's just the darkness and the accounts of the people who lived inside it long enough to bring something back. Check your doors, check your windows. Make sure you know who else is in your home tonight. Because after the third story, you are going to want to know that with absolute certainty. Welcome to True Terror Files Official. These are 10 deeply disturbing true horror stories you cannot unhear. Let's begin. Tonight, we have 10 stories waiting for you, and not one of them ends the way you will expect. Story 1 is the tenant above the account of a man named Joel Ferris in Cleveland, Ohio, who lived for 8 months in an apartment building he believed was half empty, and who discovered one morning that the unit directly above him, the unit that had always been listed as vacant, the unit whose number appeared on no lease agreement, no utility account, no management record of any kind, was not vacant at all. Story 2 is the letters. What happened to a retired school teacher named Margaret Hale, who began finding sealed envelopes in her mailbox? No postage, no return address, containing handwritten letters that described events in her daily life in precise detail, events that had not yet occurred when the letters arrived. Story 3 is The Wrong House. The experience of a truck driver named Dale Whitmore who broke down on a rural Louisiana highway at 11 p.m. Walked half a mile to the only building with lights on, knocked on the door, and stepped inside a house that, according to every record available, had been completely abandoned for 19 years. Story 4 is the roster, what a night shift charge nurse named Anita Sorensen found when she attempted to check on a patient. In room 7C of the ICU wing at a hospital in Spokane, Washington, and discovered that neither the patient nor the room existed on any record, any database, any physical floor plan of the building, yet the room was there. The patient was in the bed, and the equipment beside the bed was running. Story 5 is the camera, the footage a father named Daniel Hess captured on a security camera in his daughter's bedroom after she refused to sleep in it for 4 consecutive nights. And what that footage showed standing in the corner at 3:47 a.m., Story 6 is the campsite. What 2 brothers experienced at a remote campsite in the Ozark Mountains when they realized, on the 3rd morning, that something had been visiting their camp each night and had been leaving behind evidence that demonstrated, with quiet and terrible clarity, that it was not an animal. Story 7 is the replacement. The slow, deeply unsettling account of a woman named Claire Owens, who spent 3 months trying to convince herself that the gradual wrongness she felt every time she spoke to her elderly mother on the phone was grief or projection or loneliness, until the day she visited in person and understood with complete and devastating certainty that it was not. Story 8 is the tunnel, what 2 urban explorers named Remy and Jesse found beneath the streets of their city in a maintenance tunnel system that appeared on no official map and showed evidence of having been continuously inhabited recently and regularly and by something they could not account for. Story 9 is the message board, the experience of a 16-year-old girl named Simone, who found an anonymous online community where strangers posted descriptions of her day, her specific, private, unremarkable daily routine, hours before she lived it. And Story 10, the one I have thought about the most since I first encountered it, the one that still produces in me a particular quality of stillness when I return to it, is called The Last Call. 10 stories. Everything you need to know about why the second kind of fear never goes away. Let's begin. Joel Ferris was 36 years old, a data analyst working remotely. When he moved into Unit 4B of the Caldwell Arms apartment building in Cleveland's West Side in January A, building that the leasing office had described as running at roughly 60% occupancy, which meant quiet hallways, reliable parking, and the particular solitude that Joel, who had recently left a long and complicated relationship, was actively seeking rather than tolerating. The building had 6 floors, 12 units per floor, and according to the management company's rental availability page, units 5A, 5B, and 5C, the 3 units directly above Joel's floor, were all listed as vacant, unoccupied, available, the kind of listing that stays up on rental sites for months in a slow market without anyone being troubled by it. Joel did not think about the vacancy above him. He moved in, set up his desk near the window, established a routine, and began the slow, quiet work of rebuilding a life that felt like his own. He heard the first sound on his 11th day in the apartment, a footstep directly above his head, slow and deliberate, moving from what would have been the bedroom area toward what would have been the kitchen. One footstep. Another. Joel looked up at the ceiling, a reflex. The way you look up at things above you, and told himself it was the building settling. Old buildings do that. It meant nothing. He heard it again the following night, and the night after that. Always between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Always from directly above. Always with that same slow, deliberate quality that distinguished it in Joel's growing awareness from the randomness of a building settling, because a building settling does not retrace the same path each night with the same pause in the same place. Joel went to the leasing office on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after moving in, and told the property manager, a woman named Sandra, that he could hear footsteps from the unit above him. Sandra pulled up the lease database, confirmed that 5B was listed as vacant. No current tenant, no maintenance activity scheduled, and offered to have someone come check the unit for the mechanical source of whatever Joel was hearing. A maintenance worker went up the following afternoon and reported back. The unit was empty, clean, no mechanical issues. The footsteps continued. It continued for 2 more weeks, every night without variation, and Joel began keeping a log. Time of first footstep, duration of activity, approximate path, time of last sound. The analytical instinct of a data analyst applied to something he had run out of rational categories for. Log covered 22 nights of consistent overhead activity in a unit that management continued to confirm was unoccupied. On the 43rd day, Joel came home at 9 p.m. from the grocery store, stepped off the elevator onto the 5th floor by mistake, pressed the wrong button, distracted mind elsewhere, and walked halfway down the hall before he realized he was on the wrong floor. He turned around, and then he stopped, because at the end of the hall, in front of the door marked 5B, the door to the vacant unit above his apartment, there was a light. Not a crack of light from under the door, which might have been a maintenance lamp or a safety fixture. A warm, domestic amber light visible through the gap in the door frame, the gap between door and jamb. The kind of light that means someone is home, someone has lamps on, someone is living in that space. Joel stood at the end of that hallway and did not move for approximately 90 seconds. Then he walked to the stairwell, went down to his own floor, and called the property management company's after-hours emergency line. He described what he had seen. The on-call manager told him it was likely a maintenance light left on accidentally, and that someone would address it. The following morning, Sandra called Joel and told him, with the careful neutrality of someone managing a situation rather than explaining one, that upon investigation, Unit 5B showed no evidence of occupancy and no explanation for the light Joel had described. The footsteps stopped that night. Joel has never fully explained this to himself. He is an analytical person. He has tried. The most he has been able to conclude is this, that for 43 nights, something occupied the unit above him with perfect regularity, and that on the night he accidentally stepped onto the 5th floor and stood at the end of that hallway, something changed. He does not know if he interrupted something, or revealed something, or simply arrived at a moment when whatever was up there had finished whatever it was doing. He moved out of the Caldwell Arms 6 weeks later. He now lives in a single-story house. Says the absence of a unit above his head is not something he takes for granted. Not even now. Not for a single night. Margaret Hale was 68 years old, a retired English teacher, living alone in a 2-bedroom house in Asheville, North Carolina, a quiet, organized, intellectually grounded woman who had spent 31 years correcting other people's grammar and who approached the world as people who have spent their careers teaching precision tend to do, with a commitment to accuracy and a deep resistance to ambiguity, and she was. By every measure available, the last person you would expect to find herself in the middle of something she could not explain. Which is perhaps why what happened to her was so comprehensively destabilizing. Not just because of what the letters said, but because of what the letters said about a world that Margaret had believed. With the confidence of a woman who had built her life on careful observation and documented fact, she fully understood. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, in a standard white envelope with no stamp, no postmark, and no return address placed in her mailbox between her regular mail delivery at 11 in the morning and her retrieval of it at 3 in the afternoon, which meant it had been placed by hand by someone who had walked up her driveway in a 4-hour window on a Tuesday afternoon and slipped an anonymous envelope into her box without knocking, without announcing themselves, without any trace beyond the envelope itself. Margaret opened it, standing in her driveway. Inside was a single sheet of plain white paper, handwritten in a careful, unhurried cursive that she later described as the handwriting of someone older, someone for whom handwriting was a practiced skill rather than a remnant of education. The letter said in its entirety, "On Thursday, you will drop your favorite mug, the blue one with the chip on the handle. Don't be upset about it. It was going to happen regardless, and it doesn't matter as much as you think it does. The mug can be replaced. Take care of yourself, Margaret." Margaret read the letter twice and felt, in sequence, puzzled, faintly unsettled, and then annoyed because it was strange, and strange things annoyed her in the way that unsolved crossword clues annoyed her. As a personal affront to the order she maintained, she assumed it was someone's idea of a peculiar joke. She went inside, made tea, and did not think about the letter again until Thursday morning, when she was carrying the blue mug, the one with the chip, her favorite for 20 years, from the counter to the table, and it slipped from her hand in a way that happened so quickly she had no time to react, and shattered on the kitchen tile floor. She stood over the broken pieces for a long moment, and then she went to her writing desk and read the letter again. The second letter arrived the following Tuesday, same envelope, same handwriting, same absence of postage or return address. This one said, "Your neighbor Helen is going to ask you for help with her garden this weekend. Please say yes. She is lonelier than she lets on, and your company matters to her more than you know." Helen, who lived 3 houses down, whom Margaret waved to occasionally but had never socialized with, knocked on Margaret's door that Saturday and asked, with the careful casualness of someone who has rehearsed the question, whether Margaret might know anything about pruning rose bushes. Margaret spent the afternoon in Helen's garden. She also spent 3 hours in conversation with a woman she had lived 3 doors from for years, without ever really knowing. And she came home that evening feeling, in a way she had not expected, grateful, changed in some small but meaningful way by the afternoon. The third letter said, "Your son is going to call on Wednesday. He has something to tell you that he's been afraid to say. Listen without interrupting. He needs that from you more than he needs advice." Her son called on Wednesday, he told her, haltingly and with long pauses, about a set of struggles in his personal life that Margaret had not known the full extent of struggles he had been managing alone. At a distance, while presenting a composed face to the world and especially to his mother, Margaret listened. She did not interrupt. Afterward, her son said to her, with what sounded like relief rather than gratitude, the specific sound of something being set down that has been carried too long, "I didn't know how you would take it, Mom. I was so afraid." Margaret has received 11 letters in total, over a period of 7 months. Each one has been accurate. Each one has described something specific, personal, and verifiable that occurred within the time frame indicated. She has never identified the sender. She has never found evidence of anyone approaching her mailbox on the Tuesdays the letters arrive. She has reported the matter to her local post office, who confirmed no record of any irregular delivery, and discussed it with 2 friends who are, respectively, a retired attorney and a retired physician. Neither has an explanation. Margaret says she stopped trying to find one after the 6th letter. She says the letters are not frightening. She says they have, in a way she cannot fully articulate, made her a better version of herself than she was before they started arriving. She says the only thing that still troubles her is the signature, because there is no name. There is no closing, there is nothing at the bottom of each letter, except one handwritten line that reads, "Every time, the same. You are not as alone as you think you are." She does not know what that means. She does not know who would know to say it. She doesn't know that every time she reads it, she believes it completely, and that believing it, strangely, is the most frightening thing about the whole experience. Dale Whitmore had been driving freight routes for 14 years when the night happened. A Thursday in November on a rural stretch of highway, 90 in central Louisiana, 60 miles from the nearest city in either direction. Thick tree line on both sides of the road and nothing else. The particular kind of rural isolation that is only romantic if you are not currently standing in it at 11 o'clock at night. The truck that has just lost power, and a cell phone showing one bar that disappears when you try to use it. Dale was 44 years old, experienced, unflappable. The kind of man who had handled enough roadside situations over enough years to have a system for every mechanical failure. But his system, in every iteration, involved being able to call for help. And on this particular stretch of Louisiana highway at 11 p.m., that option was not available, which meant Dale was standing beside a dead truck in the dark, applying a manual solution to a digital problem, and after 45 minutes of attempting to restore even minimal electrical function, he accepted that the truck was not going anywhere that night and decided to walk. He had seen a light through the tree line about half a mile back, the soft, warm, amber glow of a building with people in it, and he walked back toward it along the shoulder, through the wet November cold, till a gravel driveway appeared in the darkness, and he followed it through the trees to a house, 2 stories. Wood-framed porch light on, warm light in the downstairs windows, a truck in the driveway that looked road legal and recent. Dale knocked. The door opened almost immediately. To immediately, he thought later, as though whoever was inside had been standing close to the door, and a man was there. Older, 60s perhaps, heavyset, wearing clothes that Dale thought looked slightly wrong in a way he couldn't immediately place. A flannel shirt and work pants that seemed either very well preserved or very old. The fabric too thick, the cut too dated. A detail that registered in the back of his mind and then was quickly overwritten by the relief of being out of the cold. The man smiled, said nothing, and stepped back to let Dale in. Dale explained the situation. Truck dead, no cell signal, needed to call roadside assistance or a tow. And the man nodded, gestured toward the interior of the house, and turned toward the back hallway. The interior of the house was warm and lit, but Dale registered the details the way you register details when something is sitting slightly wrong in your animal awareness. The furniture was old, genuinely old. Not vintage by choice, but old by default. The kind of heavy, dark wood furniture that belongs to a specific era and does not usually survive into the present without obvious effort. There were no electronics visible anywhere, no television, no phone that Dale could see. No power strips, no charger cables, no router lights. None of the background infrastructure of a contemporary house lived in by a contemporary person. The walls had photographs framed and hung in rows, and Dale glanced at them as he followed the man down the hallway. Black and white photographs, family photographs, formal poses, the clothing of people who had not been photographed since before Dale was born. The man led him to a back room, a small room, a room with a single window and a chair and a table, and on the table, a telephone, a rotary phone, heavy black bakelite, the kind Dale had seen in antique shops and old movies, but never in a working household. and gestured at it, and looked at Dale with an expression Dale later described not as unfriendly, but as patient. The expression of someone waiting for something they know is coming. Dale picked up the receiver. There was a dial tone. He dialed the roadside assistance number he had memorized 15 years ago. The call connected, got through to dispatch, gave his location as best he could, and was told a truck would reach him by 2 a.m. He thanked the man, turned to shake his hand, and the man was not in the doorway. The doorway was empty. Dale walked back through the house. The front room was empty. The kitchen was empty. Every room on the ground floor, including the one he had been led through, was completely empty, not vacated, not just cleared of people, but empty in the fuller sense. No coats on the hooks by the door, no keys on the counter, no evidence that anyone had been in any of these rooms at any point recently. The truck in the driveway, he noticed when he stepped back onto the porch, was not there. The driveway was empty. Dale sat on the porch steps and waited for his tow and did not go back inside and did not, if he was honest with himself, want to. The tow truck arrived at 1:45 a.m. The driver was from the area. Dale described the house, described the man, described the truck in the driveway. The driver was quiet for a moment and then said that the property Dale was describing the gravel driveway. The two-story wood frame house, the location half a mile from where the truck had broken down, had been completely abandoned since 1987. When the family that owned it walked away after a series of events, the driver described as not wanting to get into it at 2 in the morning on a cold highway. Dale checked the property records himself when he got home 3 days later. The house had last been occupied in 1986. The utilities had been disconnected in 1987. There was no record of any active account, any active occupant, any act of anything associated with that address for 38 years. The telephone call to roadside assistance is documented in the dispatch log. The call came from a location that the GPS system placed on Highway 90. The call connected on a registered line. Dale has never been able to identify the number that line is registered to. He has never gone back. He says he would not know how to explain to himself what he would be going back to see. Anita Sorensen had been a charge nurse for 11 years at Providence Regional Medical Center in Spokane, Washington, a woman of professional precision and deep institutional knowledge, the kind of nurse who knew her floor the way a navigator knows a ship. Every bed number, every protocol, every square foot of the physical space, and every name in the system. And so when she reached the end of her patient rounds on a Tuesday night in October and found on her printed roster a room number she did not recognize, she did not immediately accept that this was strange. Because people make transcription errors, administrative systems glitch. Data transfers between departments produce anomalies all the time, and a charge nurse's job is to solve the problem, not be surprised by it. The room number on the roster was 7C. Anita's ICU wing had rooms 7A, 7B, 7D, and 7E. There was number 7C. There had never been a 7C. Not in 11 years of working this floor, not in the physical reality of a corridor she had walked thousands of times.
Oh yes.
She pulled up the electronic record system. The patient file associated with 7C was their name. Age, admission date, diagnosis, signed attending physician. But when she searched the patient's name independently, the file did not appear. It existed when approached from the room number and did not exist when searched directly. Anita called the department administrator on call and reported the discrepancy. The administrator confirmed that no room 7C existed in the hospital's physical inventory and asked Anita to note the error and flag it for morning review. Anita walked to the corridor between rooms 7B and 7D. In 11 years, the stretch of wall between those two rooms had been exactly that. A wall painted the same institutional pale green as the rest of the corridor, with a fire safety notice mounted in the center of it, and a hand sanitizer dispenser below that. On the night of the Tuesday in October, there was a door. Not a new door, not a door that showed evidence of recent installation, no raw edges, no mismatched paint, no construction smell. A door that appeared to have been there for exactly as long as the corridor itself. Fitted seamlessly into the wall, with the same institutional hardware as every other door on the floor. And a room number plate reading 7C that matched the font and format and age of every other number plate on every other door on that ward. Anita stood in front of the door for a moment that she has described as the moment when her professional framework and her human instinct came into direct conflict. And her professional framework won because a charge nurse's job is to attend to patients. And if the system showed a patient in 7C, then regardless of what the map said, she was going to open the door and check on them. She did. The room was a standard ICU room, identical layout to 7A, 7B, 7D, with a bed monitoring equipment. For stand, everything in place, everything running, everything lit with the standard quiet lighting of a ward room at night. In the bed was a patient, a woman, elderly, sleeping, breathing steadily, the monitors beside her showing vitals that were stable and within normal range. The 4 was running. The equipment was functioning. The patient was real, physically and concretely present in a room that did not exist. Anita performed a standard check vitals, equipment, patient state, and then went directly to the nursing station and called the attending physician listed in the file. The physician, when reached, had no record of admitting this patient. The patient's name, when run through the system from the nursing station, returned no file. The room number, when entered into the hospital's bed management system, returned an error indicating the room did not exist. Nita went back to the corridor. The door was there. She went back to the nursing station and called the hospital administrator on call, then her supervisor, and then, when neither response felt adequate, the physical plant manager, the person responsible for the building's physical structure, who arrived 40 minutes later, examined the corridor and stood in front of the door with the expression of a person confronting a fact their professional vocabulary cannot accommodate. He opened the door. The room was empty, bed made, equipment off, for stand bare, monitors dark, no patient. No sign that anyone had been in the room, no impression in the pillow, no warmth in the bed, nothing. The hospital conducted a full investigation over the following month. The room's existence was confirmed by a structural survey that located a previously sealed-off space consistent with a single-patient room in the SL Station's original 1961 blueprint, a room that had been decommissioned and plastered over during a 1978 renovation and had not appeared in any floor plan or operational record since. Who accessed that space, how they accessed it, who the patient was, and how the monitoring equipment was running in an electrically disconnected sealed room. None of these questions were answered. The investigation report classified the incident in its formal language as an unresolved administrative and structural anomaly. Anita Sorensen left Providence Regional Medical Center 8 months later. She still works as a nurse. She says the job is still her calling and she would not change it. But she says that every time she walks a corridor she has walked before, She looks at every wall. She looks at every wall very carefully. Daniel Hess was an engineer, methodical, data-driven, skeptical by profession and by temperament. The kind of man who approached every problem with a framework and expected the framework to produce an answer. And so when his 7-year-old daughter Lily began refusing to sleep in her room, he asked her calmly and directly what was wrong. She told him there was a man in her room. He checked her room systematically and thoroughly. Because he was an engineer and systematic thoroughness was his default mode, and found nothing. He sat with her, explained the science of how the brain produces shapes in low light conditions, showed her how a pile of clothes in a dark corner becomes a form that looks human, told her the house was secure. The doors were locked. She was safe. He was 30 feet down the hall. She could call him any time. Put her back to bed. It happened again the next night, and the night after. And on the 4th night, Lily arrived in her parents' bedroom at 1 a.m. and refused, with the kind of quiet, absolute conviction that is more disturbing than screaming, to go back. She was not hysterical. She was not performing. She was the way children are when they are telling the truth about something serious still, and very certain and slightly older looking than they were the day before. Daniel installed a security camera in Lily's room the following day. Wide angle, high definition, infrared night vision, motion triggered. He mounted it in the corner of the ceiling opposite the bed, positioned to capture the entire room. He did not tell Lily. He told himself it was documentation, evidence that nothing was happening, something he could show her, something that would close the loop scientifically and let everyone get back to sleeping. He reviewed the footage the next morning at 5 a.m. before anyone else was awake. For the first 4 hours of the recording, the room was exactly what it should have been, empty still. The pale infrared wash of night vision showing the bed, the dresser, the bookshelf, the window with the curtains drawn. Nothing moving, nothing out of place. At 3:47 a.m., the motion sensor triggered. The camera began recording, and in the far corner of the room, the corner opposite the camera, the corner Lily would have been facing from her bed, the corner she had been describing for 4 nights, there was a shape. It was vertical, roughly adult height. Dark in a way that was distinct from the darkness around it, the way a solid object is distinct from the air it displaces. It did not move, did not approach the bed. It stood in the corner with a stillness that the camera captured with absolute, unambiguous clarity. The shape remained in frame for 11 minutes and 42 seconds. The motion sensor continued to trigger throughout this period, confirming that it was registering movement from the shape, even though the shape appeared stationary, meaning it was moving in a way the sensor detected, but the eye could not perceive. At 3 hours 58 minutes and 42 seconds a.m., the recording stopped. The next frame showed the corner empty. Daniel watched the footage 17 times before he called his brother, who worked in video production and who he trusted to give him an objective technical assessment. His brother called him back within 2 hours and said, in the careful language of someone choosing their words, that it was not a lens artifact. It was not a compression ghost. It was not a glitch of any kind he could identify. That it registered as a physical mass occupying physical space. And that he strongly recommended Daniel get a second opinion and also perhaps think about whether his daughter was still sleeping in that room. Daniel got 3 independent assessments from separate professionals. No one could explain the shape. No one tried to after about 30 seconds of looking at the footage. The family moved out of that house 4 months later, accepting a financial penalty on their lease without disputing it. Daniel has never publicly released the footage. He has described it in detail to several people. Every description ends the same way, with him saying that the thing that disturbs him most, more than the shape itself, more than the 11 minutes, more than the motion sensor registering movement in something that appeared still, is this: that on the first night, Lily refused to sleep in her room, before the camera, before any documentation, before any of it. He had asked her where the man stood. She pointed to the corner, the far corner. The corner the camera later confirmed. She was 7 years old. She had never seen the footage. She was right. Brothers Connor and Eli Dabrowski had been camping together since childhood, not casual camping, not campground dash with dash a dash parking lot camping, but genuine backcountry hiking with multi-day carries and no cell service, and the particular bond that forms between two people who trust each other, enough to sleep in a tent far from help. And they were in their early 30s when they spent a week in a remote section of the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas, a section they had scouted on topographic maps and chosen specifically for its isolation, accessible only by a 7-mile trail with no established campsites and no other hikers recorded in the trailhead log for 3 weeks prior to their arrival. They set up camp on the first day at a clearing near a small creek, established their routines, spent the first 2 days in exactly the way they had intended: hiking, observing, cooking over the fire, sleeping well, the comfortable quiet of two people who don't need to fill silence. On the morning of the third day, Connor woke at dawn and went to reload the bear canister and found, beside it, a pine cone. This sounds meaningless. It was not meaningless because the pine cone was standing upright on the lid of the canister, balanced on its flat base, oriented perfectly vertical. And pine cones do not balance themselves on flat surfaces. Not by wind, not by settling, not by any mechanism of the natural world that Connor, who had been spending extended time outdoors since he was 9 years old, could account for. He set it aside and said nothing to Eli. Not yet, because it was a pine cone, and saying something about a pine cone felt like the beginning of a conversation he wasn't ready to have. On the fourth morning, he woke and found 3 pine cones. Same placement, same orientation, arranged in a triangle around the bear canister. Each one balanced on its flat base with a precision that he photographed before touching them because his brain had already, without fully involving the rest of him, begun to understand that this was not coincidence and was not the natural world. He showed Eli. Eli looked at the photographs for a long time and then said very quietly, "What else?" Connor looked around the camp. On a flat rock 10 feet from the fire pit, arranged in a line with geometric precision, were 4 stones from the creek, smooth, water-worn, placed at exactly even intervals in a straight east-west orientation like markers. Neither of them had placed the stones. Neither of them had heard anything in the night. Their tent had a motion-sensitive alarm, a simple device, a basic perimeter trip, the kind that hikers use in bear country, and it had not triggered. Whatever had come into their camp and arranged the pine cones and the stones had done so silently enough that a motion sensor within 20 feet had not registered it. On the 5th morning, there were no pine cones, no stones, no objects of any kind left in the camp. But the fire which they had fully extinguished before sleeping buried the coals and poured water over the ash in the deliberate way that responsible backcountry campers do. The fire had been rebuilt. Not reignited from coals, rebuilt from scratch. New wood arranged in a proper fire lay, unlit but ready. Knew it. Placed by hand in the configuration a human being uses to build a fire, while they slept. Connor and Eli broke camp that morning and hiked out. They did not discuss what it meant until they were in the car, both of them with the particular flatness of affect that follows a sustained adrenaline event. And even then, the conversation was brief and practical rather than interpretive. They were not going back to that section of the forest. They were not going to try to explain it. And they were not going to tell the story to people who would dismiss it, because the dismissal would be worse than the memory. Connor has told the story 3 times since, to a wildlife biologist, to a retired park ranger, and once in a written account posted to a hiking forum. The biologist ruled out every known animal. The park ranger listened to the full account without expression, and then said, "You're not the first people to describe something like that from that area. You're also not the first ones to leave early." Connor asked what it was. The ranger said he didn't know. He said nobody did. Said that was, in his experience, not as unusual as people liked to think. Claire Owens was 41 years old, a marketing director in Denver, Colorado. When she first noticed something wrong with her mother, not wrong in a medical sense, not initially, not the kind of wrong that has a name and a diagnosis and a care plan, but wrong in the quieter and more disorienting sense of something familiar becoming unfamiliar in a way that defies the available vocabulary. Her mother, Patricia, was 72, lived alone in the house where Claire had grown up in a suburb of Cincinnati, was sharp-minded and self-sufficient and prone to the particular opinionated cheerfulness of a woman who had decided in her 60s to stop worrying about what people thought of her and had found the experience deeply liberating. Claire talked to her mother twice a week on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and had done so for 15 years without interruption. And she knew her mother's voice and her patterns and her conversational habits with the intimacy of someone who has had the same conversation in all its variations several thousand times. The wrongness started in September, and Claire spent 2 months telling herself it was grief her father had died 8 months prior. And grief changes people. Grief changes the texture of their voice and the rhythm of their thinking and the things they choose to say. And Claire had given her mother enormous latitude in those 8 months because loss is not a clean or linear thing, and there was no rule book for how a 72-year-old widow was supposed to sound on the phone. But by November, the wrongness had accumulated beyond the threshold of grief. It was specific wrongness, detailed wrongness, wrongness that had edges she could identify when she stopped forcing herself not to. Her mother no longer asked about Claire's colleague Maria, whom she had asked about every Tuesday for 3 years because she found Maria's dating life genuinely compelling. Her mother had stopped using the phrase "I'll tell you what" before making any declarative statement, a verbal tic so habitual that Claire had unconsciously adopted it herself. Her mother, who had taken her coffee black for as long as Claire could remember, and who held mild contempt for people who put things in coffee, mentioned casually in October that she'd started using creamer and found it improved the experience considerably. Small things. The kind of things that accumulate into a portrait of a person. And when that portrait changes, you notice, even if you cannot say exactly which brushstroke is different. Claire drove to Cincinnati in December. She has described the visit in the account she gave to a close friend as the most frightening experience of her life, which is a significant statement from a woman who had been through a car accident, a medical emergency, and the loss of a parent in the same 18-month period. The woman who opened the door of her mother's house looked exactly like her mother. The physical accuracy was complete and total height. Build, face, voice, the particular smell of her mother's preferred hand lotion, the familiar clutter of the kitchen, everything in its correct place, And yet, over 2 days in that house, Claire cataloged 73 specific inaccuracies. Things the woman got wrong about Patricia Owens' history. Preferences, relationships, and memories that she should not have gotten wrong. Small in isolation, devastating in accumulation, the kind of errors that a person makes when they have memorized a character rather than lived it. The woman called Claire's college roommate by the wrong name. She did not remember the specific reason Claire had not gone to prom. She referred to Claire's late father's sister as a cousin. She did not flinch when Claire touched the back of her hand in a specific way that Patricia Owens had always flinched at. A sensitivity there since childhood. A small physical fact so personal and so ingrained that Claire had never mentioned it to anyone. Claire drove home to Denver on the second day and called a family friend, a woman named Ruth who had known Patricia Owens for 40 years. She described what she had observed without framing it. Ruth was quiet for a long time and then said, "I've been noticing it since August. I didn't know how to tell you." Claire has never told anyone outside of 2 people what she fully believes about what she experienced in Cincinnati. She says she knows how it sounds. She says she knows there are medical explanations, neurological explanations, grief-based explanations, that she is a rational person and she holds all of them in one hand. She says that in the other hand she holds the memory of a woman who looked exactly like her mother, who knew almost everything about her mother's life, who sat across a kitchen table from Claire and smiled at her with her mother's smile and her mother's eyes, and did not know that Patricia Owens had always flinched when someone touched the back of her left hand. She says she has no framework for what that means. She says she is still building one. Remy Castillo and Jesse Park were 24 and 23 respectively, both architecture students at a university in a mid-sized Midwestern city. Both members of an informal urban exploration community that documented abandoned or off-limits urban infrastructure, a practice that exists in a legal gray area and which both of them understood perfectly well, which neither of them was going to stop doing, because the city beneath the city, as Remy put it, was the most interesting thing he had found in 4 years of studying how cities were built. They had explored 3 storm drain networks, 2 decommissioned rail tunnels, and 1 condemned hospital wing by the time they found the maintenance access hatch in the subbasement. Of a mixed-use commercial building where Jesse's uncle ran a dry cleaning business, a hatch that appeared on no building plan Jesse had ever reviewed, covered with a plate that showed significant wear, consistent with regular use, rather than the surface corrosion you would expect on something sealed and forgotten. They opened it on a Saturday in April, at 6 in the morning, with full equipment, headlamps, backup lights, a portable air quality monitor, a camera, a map of what they expected to find based on the city's public infrastructure records, which indicated a standard maintenance access to an early 20th century brick-lined utility corridor. What they found was not a standard utility corridor. The tunnel below the hatch was brick-lined, consistent with early 20th century construction. It's roughly 5 feet wide and 6 feet tall, small enough to require slight ducking, large enough to move through comfortably, and it ran north from the access point in a straight line for what their pace count estimated at approximately 200 meters before branching into a T-junction. The tunnels were clean. Not clean in the sense of recently maintained, clean in the sense of actively used, regularly traversed. The brick floor worn smooth at the center, the way floors are worn by foot traffic sustained over years. No debris, no standing water, no accumulated material of any kind in the main thoroughfare, which was not consistent with any abandoned infrastructure Remy or Jesse had documented before abandoned tunnels. Accumulate things always. It is the nature of enclosed abandoned spaces. In a tunnel this clean meant either very recent maintenance activity or very recent and regular human passage. They followed the right branch of the T-junction for another 100 meters and found, recessed into the tunnel wall, in a section where the brick had been modified, not demolished, modified carefully and deliberately altered a space. Not a room, not formally, but a carved-out section of the tunnel, approximately 8 feet by 12, with a ceiling height that allowed standing. Inside the space, a folding cot with a sleeping bag on it. A milk crate functioning as a side table, with a battery lantern on top of it. A second milk crate, with a stack of paperback books, plastic storage bin latched, that Remy photographed but did not open. A water container, the kind used for extended camping, still partially full. Remy could hear the water moving when he touched it. And on the wall at eye height, a row of marks, tally marks, scratched into the mortar between bricks, the kind of mark someone makes to count days. Remy counted 412 marks before he stopped counting. The lantern was warm. They had been in the tunnel for 40 minutes. Remy and Jesse left the tunnel at a pace that neither of them described as running, but that also cannot be accurately described as walking, and they replaced the access hatch and did not return to that building. They reported the space to the city's infrastructure department using an anonymous tip line, describing the location and what they had found. The infrastructure department investigated. A public response, issued 6 weeks later, stated that the area in question had been inspected and found consistent with known utility. Infrastructure with no evidence of unauthorized habitation. Remy read the statement and said nothing for a long time, and then said, "The lantern was warm. Jesse has the photographs. Neither of them has shared them publicly." Remy says it is not because he is afraid of the person who is living there, though that fear is real and present. He says it is because of the tally marks. Because 412 days is not a person who got lost. 412 days is a person who chose to be there. And the question of why someone would choose to live beneath a city in a tunnel no one was supposed to know about. For over a year, that question, he says, is the one he cannot stop trying to answer. Simone Achterberg was 16 years old, a junior in high school in a suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Kind of teenager who spent a reasonable and unremarkable amount of time on the internet, primarily on art-sharing platforms and a small private Discord server with 6 friends from her illustration class, and who had no history of unusual experience and no particular interest in the paranormal. Which is relevant because what happened to her arrived without invitation into a completely ordinary digital life and produced a category of discomfort that she says, even now, 4 years later, she does not fully have the language for. She found the message board through a link in a comment thread on a general art forum, a link with no label, just a URL, the kind that occasionally appears in comment sections and that most people have enough internet literacy to leave alone. But that Simone clicked because she was bored and because the URL's structure suggested a small independent forum of the kind she used regularly. The board was plain, minimal formatting, no banner, no apparent moderation. A single ongoing thread that had been active for what the timestamp suggested was approximately 8 months. The thread had no title. It had no specific topic. It was simply a sequence of posts, each one a short paragraph describing someone's day in specific. Granular detail, not a famous person's day, not a fictional person's day, but the kind of day that only has meaning if you know the person living it. Coffee from the blue mug, argument with the history teacher about a late assignment, lunch alone because the usual table was taken, the specific song heard on the drive home, the specific thing said to a specific sibling at dinner. Simone read approximately 20 posts before she realized. With the particular coldness of a realization that arrives faster than your ability to accept it, that the most recent post was describing her day, her specific, private, unremarkable Tuesday in a suburb of Minneapolis, the coffee her mother had made that morning in the wrong cup. The argument with her history teacher about the late essay that she had been certain no one else had heard. The lunch eaten alone in the library because Kayla's table was full. The song she had heard on her mother's car radio on the way home. A song she had not known the name of. A song she had hummed to herself in her room that evening. It was all there, posted at 11:47 p.m. after she had gone to bed. Posted by a username that was a string of numbers, an account with no profile, no history outside of this thread. She scrolled back through the thread, post after post of someone else's specific, private, unremarkable day, and then starting about 12 posts before the most recent one, beginning at a date that corresponded to the week Simone had first clicked the link. Her days. Her days in sequence, in accurate detail, posted each night after she went to sleep, written with the calm and specific certainty of someone who had been present for all of it. She did not post on the board. She closed the tab and then she sat in her room for a long time with the particular stillness of a person trying to decide what to do with information they do not know how to categorize. She went back to the board the following morning to confirm she had read it correctly, and the thread had been deleted. The URL returned a 404 error. The forum, such as it was gone. She has searched for it since, systematically, repeatedly, using every archive and cache page tool available to her, and has found no trace of it. She has told this story to 2 people, her older sister, and a school counselor she trusted, both of whom she was careful to pre-warn that she was telling it not because she wanted to be believed, but because she needed to say it out loud to someone who would not dismiss it. Neither dismissed it. Her sister asked her, "Do you think whoever was writing those posts could still see her, was still watching?" Simone said she did not know. She said that was precisely and exactly the part she cannot stop thinking about. This is the last story, and it is the one I want you to hold on to, the one without mechanism, without a rational component that almost explains it, without even a partial framework into which the facts can be placed and made to sit still. It is also, I think, the most quietly devastating of the 10, not because it is the most frightening, but because of what it asks you to feel about the person at the center of it, and what she carried, and why she chose, finally, after 3 years of silence, to tell it. Vivian Tran was 34 years old, a graphic designer living in Austin, Texas, when her sister Rachel died. Rachel was 31, 4 years younger than Vivian. Her closest friend, in the fullest sense of that word, the person. Vivian called first about everything important and most things unimportant. And she died in April of a medical event that was sudden, unexpected, and gave no one any time to prepare for it, which is the particular cruelty of a certain kind of loss, not the long goodbye, not the gradual adjustment, but the phone call, the drive to the hospital. The conversation with a physician in a hallway that Vivian describes as the moment the world reorganized itself permanently around a new and irreversible fact. Vivian spent the first year in the functional fog of acute grief. The second year was harder in some ways. The fog lifts and you realize the fog was protective, that underneath it the loss is as total and as present as it ever was. just now without the numbness. In the third year, she told a therapist that she had accepted Rachel's death while simultaneously being unable to fully integrate it. That there was a version of her that understood her sister was gone, and a version of her that still, at some level below reason, expected the phone to ring. On a Thursday evening in November, 3 years and 7 months after Rachel died, Vivian's phone rang. Unknown number, she answered, because she always answers unknown numbers, a professional habit. There was a pause of approximately 3 seconds, and then her sister's voice. Not a voice like her sister's, not a voice that reminded her of her sister's voice, specific and individual, and immediately, completely, unmistakably Rachel. The particular quality of it, the particular rhythm, the way Rachel said her name, which Vivian has described as the most specific and personal thing she can think of, because no one says your name exactly the way that people who have known you longest say it, the particular weight of it, the familiarity encoded in the sound. The voice said, "Viv, it's me. I know you can't call back. I just need you to hear this. I'm okay. I'm somewhere good. Stop blaming yourself for the hospital. You got there as fast as you could, and I knew you were there. I knew. Take care of Mom. And Viv, open the studio. You keep putting it off. Open it. I want you to." The call lasted 42 seconds, and then disconnected. Vivian has described the 42 seconds following the end of the call as the most complete silence she has ever experienced. Not quiet, but the particular silence of a world that has just done something it was not supposed to be capable of doing and has not yet resumed its normal operations. She called the number back immediately. The number was not in service. She called her carrier. The carrier confirmed the number had no active account associated with it and could not be traced to any registered line. She sat on her kitchen floor for approximately an hour before she was able to move. The next morning, she called her mother. She did not tell her about the call, not yet, not directly, but she asked her, carefully and with a specific question in mind. Had Vivian arrived at the hospital before Rachel died, or after? Vivian has never been certain. She had driven very fast, and she had found a parking space quickly, and she had run through the hospital, and she did not know. She has never known whether she made it in time. Her mother said, "You were there, Vivian. You were holding her hand." She knew. Vivian Tran opened her design studio 4 months later. It has been operating for 2 years. She says it is the best thing she has ever done professionally, and one of the best decisions she has ever made in her life. She has told the story of the call twice, once to her therapist and once to her mother. She says she is telling it now in this account, not because she needs to prove it happened or convince anyone of anything about the nature of what made the call, but because Rachel asked her to open the studio. And she did, and she thinks Rachel would want the story told, because Rachel always thought the stories that were hardest to tell were the ones most worth telling. Vivian says she does not know what called her that night. She says she knows what the voice sounded like, what it said, and what happened after. She says that is enough. She says that has always been enough. 10 stories. 10 real people. 10 moments where the world opened up and revealed something it had been keeping just out of sight, just beyond the edge of what we are told is possible, just past the boundary of the ordinary life most of us have agreed to treat as the full extent of what exists. And here's what I keep coming back to. Here is the thread I cannot stop pulling on when I try to find the shape of everything we have heard tonight. Every single one of these 10 people continued. They did not stop. Joel found a single-story house, and moved into it and continued. Margaret kept reading the letters and continued. Dale drove his truck again and continued. Anita became a better nurse and continued. Daniel raised his daughter and continued. Connor and Eli go camping still, just not there, and continue. Claire is still building her framework, and she continues. Remy and Jesse graduated and are working and continue. Simone makes art and continues. And Vivian opened the studio and continues, and it is the best thing she ever did. That is the thing the darkness does not count on. That is the thing that none of these 10 stories prepared for, and whatever they were doing when they intersected with these 10 lives, that people continue. That the fracture does not mean the end. That a person can stand inside the most disorienting and inexplicable moment of their existence and walk out the other side still fundamentally, stubbornly, irreducibly themselves. That is the most human thing I know how to describe. And that is why we tell these stories here on True Terror Files Official. Not to destroy you with dread, but to sit with you in the dark and remind you that real people survive real, inexplicable things and come back to tell us about it, and that the telling itself is an act of extraordinary courage. If tonight reached inside you and rearranged something, if one of these 10 stories is still sitting in you right now, quiet and heavy and refusing to leave, then we did our job. Subscribe to True Terror Files Official. We are a small channel, and every single person who subscribes and watches and stays with us matters completely and concretely to what we are building here. Leave a comment and tell us which of tonight's 10 stories you will still be thinking about tomorrow morning. We read every one. We will be back with more true stories, more real accounts, more of the darkness that the world has documented and cannot explain. Until then, go check your doors, count the rooms in your house, make sure you know exactly how many there are, and remember what Anita found on the night she walked her corridor for the 1,000th time and looked up and saw a door that had never been there before. That the most terrifying things are not the things that appear from nowhere. They are the things that were always there, and you simply had not noticed them yet.